We're looking now at the Mishnah on Daf Chavav Amud Beis. By Isha Shenechbesha, the sugis before this we're dealing with Shvuya. This too is an extension of the case of a Shvuya. A woman was taken captive, and the question is whether she was violated by her captors. If she's an Ashes Ish, we're going to soon see that there might be a problem of her returning to her husband, even if he's not a Kohen. B'dei Ovdei Kol Chavim. And now the Mishnah differentiates why was she taken into captivity. Al Yidei Mamon, if it's because she owed a debt and she wasn't able to pay the debt, which I guess was quite common historically, is Muteris L'Baila. Even if her husband is a Kohen, we're not going to be Choshesh that they would have raped her. And the reason for that is because they're afraid that they would lose what's called the Dmei Pidyon, meaning the ransom money that's given in lieu of the fact that she owes a chov, an outstanding debt. And even according to the law of the non-Jewish government, they are not permitted to violate her if it was only on a debt. They can only maintain, so to speak, possession over her until she's ransomed and pays up the debt. So they would actually mess themselves up if they would be noig minag hefker, if they would just have relations with her, rape her. But al yidei nefashos, if she was condemned to death and then she was taken captive, so here the law does not prevent them from just having hefkeris with her and asur l'bayla. Now, why is she asur l'bayla if he's not a Kohen? And the law is that a woman is only asur l'bayla if she had a relationship willingly, not bionus. But here it's a little different. Why? Because they're noig ba minag hefker, and we're afraid that at some point maybe she had a will to have that beer. Now, there are three interpretations that are offered here. Rashi, the Shita Mekubetzes, and Tosfos. Rashi holds that since they're noig minag hefker, she's going to be raped many, many times, and probably to many different people. And Rashi's learning that we're afraid that to one of these people and one of these multiple occasions, she had ratzon. Tosa says that since she's afraid that they're going to kill her, she decides to play games with them, to try to appease them and give them pleasure, hoping that maybe they would spare her life. I mean, this happened during the Holocaust too. So therefore, at some point, she offers herself to them for their sexual pleasure so that she can save herself. The Shita Mekubetzes explains that she already decided in her mind that she'll never go back to her husband because ultimately they'll probably put her to death. She's been condemned to death. So if she's, becoming Asur al-Baila by having Ratzon doesn't mean anything to her, because it's not even on her radar screen that she would return to her husband. The Gemara says the following: Omar Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak Omar Rav Lo Shanu. When do we say that if she was taken captive because of an outstanding monetary debt, she's muteris l'bayla ela b'diyad sheyad Yisrael tkefa al ovdei kol chavim, that the Jews have rulership over the goyim. They have dominion over the goyim, and therefore the goyim, have to comply with the Jewish law. One wonders when in Jewish history did we have Yad Yisrael Tkefa? Maybe today, I don't know, but historically, wow, it's kind of rare. Aval Yad Ovdei Kocham Tkefa Al Atzman, this is a euphemism for Klal Yisrael. So they have control and dominion over Klal Yisrael. And therefore, they treat the moment of Klal Yisrael as hefker. They just take it away whenever they want it. They confiscate Jewish property. And not only that, they treat the Jewish woman as hefker. Is afilu al yidei mamon. Even if they took her in, and the excuse to take her in was because she had an outstanding debt, asur labaila, they realize that even if they'll have deal with her, they're not going to lose them money. They'll still be able to demand a ransom, so they might as well have fun.
Can I just ask one thing?
Please, Ira.
Why would one of the opinions not be that she was like Esther and like Karka Olam?
The question of Esther and Karka Olam is only as far as whether she has to give up her life. We're addressing a different question. We're addressing the question of whether maybe during the time that she was in capture, she may have had, on one occasion, a ratzon to have this relationship with a man. And it might not have been Yehar Gval Yavar because Isha Karka Olam. I would go even a step further. It's possible that within the context of this situation in which she was condemned to death and they took her captive, and this is during the period of time in her life where she's waiting to be killed, it could very well be at that point she's so desperate she won't even be Karka Olam. In fact, getting back to Esther, but that's a whole discussion, the pasuk says Kasher Avadati Avadati.
Right.
Mordechai perseveres over Esther to go into Achashverosh. According to one opinion in Chazal, she had to give herself willingly and actively in the intimacy with Achashverosh Yimach Shemo. And as a result, she says, Asher Avadati 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 Mimcha, I will be lost from you, according to that opinion that she was married to Mordechai. Even Esther went beyond the Karka Olam. But I don't know exactly how you reconcile that with Kiddush Hashem and Yehar Gval Yavar.
Right.
I guess you have to say that Bias Akum is not Yehar Gval Yavar, which is one of the Shittas in the Rishon.
Right. Okay.
Mosiv Rava, hey, Rabbi Yossi HaKohen, Rabbi Zechariah ben Hakatza, Al Bas Yisrael Shahur Hana. So we're talking about a case in which a Jewish girl was taken as a mashko, as a collateral. But the word hurhana seems to be an active verb. It means that since she owed an outstanding debt, she offered herself to the goyim as a mashkon, meaning like, hold on to me until I somehow, maybe from the Jewish community or somehow, I'll be able to scrape up the money to pay you back. And this happened in the city of Ashkelon. Now that's very important because Ashkelon was a Palestinian city, not today, Baruch Hashem. But at the time, the Plishtim lived in Ashkelon, and they had an autonomous government. And we have testimony that she offered herself to the Goyim as a mashkon. Now the witnesses come back and they tell us about the fact that she's now under captivity by the Goyim, the Plishtim in Ashkelon. V'richakua b'nei mishpachta. And the family of Kohanim, meaning they were afraid that she was raped. And in the laws of Kohen, a woman who's raped by a guy is a zona, and she's asura l'kohen. However, the story has another part to it. Ve'edeha, those same witnesses that testified that she was taken captive, we don't know, we have no independent evidence other than these two Eidim that she was taken captive, and they add something very important to that testimony. That she was never alone with any of her captors in a private place, and she was not, forced to have any sexual activity. And the Chachamim said to the Bnei Mishpacha that want to be marchika, mimanavsha. Why do you know? How do you believe that she was taken under captivity? You have no evidence for that. Elo what? Atem maminim. You believe the two witnesses. Is haminu shalom nistar shalom nitma. You can't take half of their edus, say we trust them on this and not on that. The im iatem maminim. If you don't believe the edim, shalom nispa shalom nitma, that she didn't have any sexual escapade there, is al taminu shehurana. Don't even believe that she was taken into captivity. If you're trusting the edim, then you have to trust them for everything. It's a little bit reminiscent of the statement, the principle of hapeshasu hapeshayitir, meaning if you're relying on these edim, then rely on them for everything. So the Gemara asks the Kashava, Ashkel Diyad Ovekucham Tkifal Atzman. Atzman is always a euphemism for Yisrael. So in Ashkelon, the Goyim have control over the Jewish people. They dominate. And therefore, she should certainly be Asura. Uktani, and yet the Mishnah says, here we turn to Daf Chav Zayin, Hurana in, only in a case where she had borrowed money and she gave herself over as a collateral, so to speak, as a mashkon, that in event that she doesn't pay up the chov, she can't scrape up the money to repay the chov, then after a certain period of time, I guess, then he's going to remain in captivity forever and ever. And in Dini Archos, according to the law of the government, and we're talking about Ashkelon, so it's a non-Jewish government, she's knuya lehem. In other words, according to the laws of the government, if she is not capable of paying her debts and she's taken into captivity in lieu of those outstanding debts, then she's like a slave to them. She doesn't have any status other than knuya lahem. Knuya lahem means they own her physically. In such a case, we have to be afraid that she had be'ilah. So again, if not for the fact that the Eidim were there to testify that she was never, even on one occasion, alone with any of them, in the absence of such Eiduts, she would be Tmeah. We would assume that her chazaka is a chezkas tuma. Tuma means be'ilah in this case. Now let's be medayik. Hurana in nech b'shalo. Hurana means she gave herself willingly because she had this outstanding loan. Nech b'shalo means she was taken against her will. She didn't pay her debts, and they simply absconded with her. And her, the people to whom she owes the money, those are called the noshim. They took her into captivity forcefully, and there was no Misira Midaita. She did not offer herself. So therefore, they would be afraid and inhibited from having a rape situation with her, even according to the laws of the Goyim, because she was nechbisha. Lo means we do not give her a cheskas tuma. So she only has a cheskas tuma. In the case of Hurana, where she willingly was Moseres Asatzma, she gave herself over to the notion. But in a case where they absconded with her against her will, they kidnapped her. Apparently, we don't say that she has a cheskes tuma, and this is against Rav Shmuel bar Rab Yitzchak. We have a diuk in the Mishnah against Rav Shmuel bar Rab Yitzchak. If you remember carefully, Rav Shmuel bar Rab Yitzchak was of the opinion that if Yad Ovei Kacham Kefa, then Afilu al Yidei Mamon he asura l'bayla. She has a cheskas tuma. So this is certainly a case of al Yidei Mamon, and we're assuming that she does not have a cheskas tuma, whereas Rab Shmuel bar Rab Yitzchak assumes that she has a cheskas tuma. The Gemara answers that the diuk is incorrect. Why? Hu adin afilu nechbesha. She would be asura and becheskas beila, even in the case where they forcefully kidnapped her. The Mishnah, when it says hurana, is discussing and addressing a situation, a particular scenario that took place, an actual case where she willingly gave herself over as a collateral in lieu of her chov. But really the same din of tuma that we have, a cheskes tuma, would apply even if she was nechbetsha. Why? Because it's yad oved kochavim kefal atzma. Now we have another lishna, another transmission of what Rava said. We thought that Rava in the first transmission was raising an objection to Shmuel Rabbi Yitzchak from our Mishnah. And now we have it that the exact opposite is true. Rava brought our Mishnah as a proof to support Rav Shmuel Rabbi Yitzchak. Ika diamri Omer Rava, afana nami tnina. We learned exactly like Rav Shmuel Rabbi Yitzchak in our Mishnah, that if it's Yad Yis Ovei Kocham Tkefal Yisrael, we suspect that that she had a Be'ila, she was Becheskas Tuma, even in a case where she was taken captivity because of Mammon. And where do we see this? Heid Rab Yossi HaKohen, Rab Zchari ben Akatzav al Basi Sosha Hurana, Bi Ashkelon, Verichaku B'nei Mishpachta. They were choshesh that she was nitma. And they were kohanim, so even if she was raped against her will, she became a zona, asur l'kohen. And v'yedeu mi'idin olesh lo nislo sho nitma amru chachamim im atem aminim shehurano is haminu shalo nistra v'shlo nitma v'im atem ma'aminim shalo nistra v'shlo nitma is al taminu shehurano. So now Rava wants to prove from this Mishnah of Aha, the story that's recorded here in the Mishnah is Ba'ashkelon. The Al Yidei Mamon have. And it's clear from the Mishnah that she was taken into captivity in lieu of an outstanding loan. And in Ashkelon, it's Yad Ovei Kacham Tkifal Yisrael. And why is it that she was muteres, according to Chacham, muteres l'kohanim? Taima, the reason is the Edom Eden Osa, because the Edom saved her by testifying that she was not nitma. Ha ein Edom Eden Osa. In the absence of Edom, lo, the Mishnah wouldn't have established she's tahora, but rather we have to be choshesh that maybe she was nivala l'chovya. My love, and it would seem to be loshna hurana, loshna nechbesha. There should be no difference between Hurana and Nechbetsha as far as onus is concerned. In both cases, since she's Muchzekes B'Yoda Machmas Mamon, and therefore, when they take her as like a Kenyan, that she's a slave, she has to serve them. When the Brisa says Hurana, it doesn't mean Dafka Hurana. That was just the case. The same halach would apply in an nechbesha. And this is a proof to Rabbi Shmuel Bar Yitzchak that once it's Yad Yisrael Tkefal Yisrael, even though she was taking captivity for mammon purposes, we have to worry and consider that she was Nivala Liyaku. So Gemara says, lo, if you take a look at the Mishnah, this is not a support for Shmuel Bar Yitzchak because Hurana, shiny. It's a case where she willingly offered herself as a collateral in lieu of the payment of the chol. And that's different than nichbah b'ones. Because in the case of Hurana, she's basically being moser as atzma lekinyan. I'm knuya lachem. I'm paying up my debt by giving you my body. However, in the case of nechbah, is against her will. She's not knuya lahem, even according to their laws. And therefore, they would not want to be boil her against the law because if doing so, they may actually have to forfeit the money of Dmei Pijona, the money that they are demanding as ransom money. All right. Now the Gemara is going to quote another opinion in interpreting Rav Shmuel Rav Yitzchak. And that Rav Shmuel Rav Yitzchak was not adding a comment on the case in the Mishnah of Al Yidei Mamon Muteres L'Baila. Ika Demrami Le Mirme. There were those who asked a kasha from the Mishnah. Tanan. So now we're positing a stira, what looks like a contradiction between our Mishnah and Ksubis and the Mishnah in Masechet Ebios. Al Yidei Mamon, if she was taken into captivity because of an outstanding loan, Uteres L'Baila. We are going to assume that they would not, these terrible people would not try to be mafsid the Dmei Pidyon by having Be'ilah with her. Ureminu. And we ask the following contradiction from the Mishnah, which contradicts this Mishnah in Edios. Our Mishnah says, hey, Rabbi Yossi, Bechule, etc. And it's only in Hurana, then we're Choshesh for Be'ilah. And the Maisa that happened was in Ashkelon, Dal Yidei Mamon. And nevertheless, Tani, time adika Edom Ameidin Osa, Ein Edom Ameidin Osa Lo, she'd be assumed to have a Be'ilah. That's a kasha on Rav Shmuel Rav Yitzchak. Let me just go over this one more time. That if there wasn't Edus, she'd be Asura. And why is that? Because it's Yad Ovdei Kochavim Tkefa. And even though she was taking captivity for mammon purposes, she's Becheskas Nitma, unless there are Edim. One second. So, oh yeah, I'm sorry. So this is against our Mishnah, because our Mishnah says that if she was Nishbeis Machmas Mamon, they're afraid to be boil her. Umeshani, and on this apparent question, a stira between the Mishnah here and the Mishnah Edios, that's where Rav Shmuel Rav Yitzchak steps up to the plate in order to reconcile what seems to be a contradiction. Omer Rav Shmuel Rav Yitzchak lo kasha. There's no contradiction between the two Mishnayos. They can be reconciled. Why? Kan, in our Mishnah, where it says that when she was taken captivity for monetary purposes, we're not going to be choshesh she was nivala. That's only b'makom sheyad Yisrael keifal ovikochom. But on the mission in Edios, that in a case of hurana, yesh lachshol shem nivala, that's sheyad ovikochom keifal atzman. That's where in Ashkelon, the Jews are under the dominion of the Goyim, and the Goyim therefore not afraid of losing their moment. There's no way that they're going to lose that moment, and therefore nivala, even though it was hurano matzmach masmama. So basically, according to this second transmission of Rab Shmuel, there's no difference between nechbisha and hurano. Since it's yad ovikachavim tkefa, they have no inhibitions. They'll be boel. But now let's look at the end of the Mishnah. Al yedei nefashos asura. Right? If she was condemned to death, the Mishnah establishes that she cannot go back to her husband. Why? They're going to be noig ba minig hefker, and she wants to appease them and find favor in their eyes, so that she'll save her skin. Therefore, with choshesh, maybe nisratz alehem liboilo. Excuse me for just 1 second. All right. You're going to have some
Maybe I will go after.
let me know, would you?
I'm gonna leave. I'm gonna take.
Did you you need insurance? And did you find the thing that the guy left you upstairs? Okay. So if either we'll eat supper when you come back after my chavrusa or before that. Oh. Sorry.
No problem.
Okay, so now we're talking about a case of al yedei nefashot. She was condemned to death, and she's asura lebaila because they're noig ba minig hefker. And now the Gemara is going to add different scenarios of an isha shenishbeis al yedei nefashos. Omar Rav kigon shei ganovi. Okay, so back in the old times, when a ganav was caught as a thief, then he was put to death by hanging. And then they would make a declaration that the house of this person is completely hefker, take over his house, take over his wife. And if a woman was married to a man who was caught as a thief, she would be taken captivity, and the chazaka was that she was nivala. That's the opinion of Ra. Levi Omer Kagon Ishto Shel Ben Dunoi. Ben Dunoi was a murderer, a famous mafioso, and he was caught by the Malchus. And his wife was Asura Bechezka Shenivalo, they're mafkir. But a person who's caught in theft, we don't assume that his wife was necessarily nivalo. They're not so machmir in the case of gneva to be mafkir the bias and the nashim like they do in Rotseach. That's according to Levi. Another machlokus, Amar Chizkiah, v'husha nigmar dinom lahariga. When Rav and Levi were speaking about, respectively, either a wife of a ganav or the wife of Rotseach, that she's asura lebalean, that's a case where nigmar dina lahariga. There already was a final court decision in which they were condemned to death, either for gneva according to Rav, or as a Rotseach according to Levi. like Ishto shel ben Dunoi. However, if there was never a Gemar Din Lamisa, then she's allowed to return to her husband, because before the final verdict is handed down, they're afraid to have Be'ilu with her. They will be punished by the government. We're getting an insight here into the sociology of the Jews in Golos.
Right.
Yochanan Omar, Afal Pishlo Nigmar Dinam La Riga, they would be mafkir her even if there was no Gmar Din. Like when it comes to the Jewish people, it's less din, less time. The Mishnah continues. Ir Shekavshua Karkom. Karkom is a siege, and they used to set up a siege around the city. Is Kol HaKohanos Shenimtzo B'tocha Psulos. All those women who are married to Kohanim can no longer return to their husbands, because the chash is that these people, Yamach Shemam, they came into the city and they wantonly raped the women. And in the case of a Kohen, she becomes a zona. However, if there were witnesses that can claim that they were with these women for the whole time, and they knew and they testified that they were not alone with any man, is afilu eved. We will rely, which we never do, on the testimony of an eved, or afilu shivcha. They're normally disqualified. Harei elu ne'eman. They're believed to be mitayr the women to their husbands who are kohanim, even if there's only one aid, even if he's an eved or a shivcha, because the Chachamim would make it with regard to shvuya, and all we need is one person to testify on her. However, ein neman adam al yidei atzmo. It has to be someone other than the person herself. She, the shvuya, is not believed to testify that she's tahora. So this case of a siege of a karkom is considered basically like shvuya, as if all the women inside are captives. Sorry. Reminu, the Gemara asks, what about another Mishnah? Wait, where's this other Mishnah? I'm sorry. Dalid. Oh, a Mishnah towards the end of Masechet Avodah Zarah. Baleshe shebola ir v'shas shalom chavios psukos asuros stumos mutaros v'shas milchama elu ve'elu mutaros l'fi she'ein pnai l'naseh. We're talking about a city that was surrounded by goyim, by soldiers, and they're coming into the city now to rampage the city and take as much, confiscate as much, what they call in Hebrew shalal, booty,
Right.
take away
Right.
and confiscate all the Jewish possessions. And now the question is, if they had wine, barrels of wine, do we assume that they drank from the barrels of wine? And therefore that would make the yayin into yayin nesach. So the Mishnah says it depends. If it's b'shas shalom, if there's no war going on between one nation and the other, so then the soldiers have plenty of free time. They're not in any rush to move along urgently. There's no battlefield, there's no battlefront, and they take their times in the city. And therefore, we're going to worry about yayin nesach. If it's chavios psuchos and there's no covering, they used to cover, they used to take plaster and concrete and plaster down the top lid over the chavis. But here it was an open chavis. Asuros, it has the status of yayin nesach. Minastam, we assume that they took this wine for their own purposes. However, stumos, the barrels that are sealed, mutaros. You're allowed to drink from them. There's no isu yain nesach, because if they would have used them for yain nesach, the seal would have been broken open. However, b'shas milchama, elu ve'elu mutaros, even if it's an open barrel, the soldiers are presumably too preoccupied to waste their time, their precious time, and start drinking wine.
Right.
Now here the Mishnah seems to be addressing not the drinking of the wine, but the libations of the wine for avodas kochamin. And since they're trudim, they're preoccupied with iske milchama, they have to go out to battle. Therefore, since it's b'shas milchama, we're not going to suspect that maybe they had time to run around pouring this wine for the sake of their idols. And l'chora, the same logic should apply to be'ilah, that they don't have time to start raping women. They got to be on their toes and urgently go out to the battlefield. And that's against our Mishnah, because our Mishnah says that we owe, during Milchama time, when the soldiers of the capturing country surround the city with a siege, all the women inside are considered shvuyos, psulas lekuhuna. We don't say that the chayalim are preoccupied with the milchama, and therefore they don't have the possibility of focusing on raping the women. Omar Rav Mari says, even though it's shas milchama, nevertheless, livhol yesh pnai, there's always time for sexual pleasure. And that's called yitrom takvam, otherwise known as taivas niyuf. L'naseach ein pnai, okay, so we won't pour the wine for the idols. The idols will forgive us. We're during a milchama, we're busy. But for this kind of activity, they always have time. That's Rav Mari. Okay, now we're going to have Chizkiah. Rabbi Yitzchak bar Elazar Mishmei de Chizkiah Amar, even in our Mishnah, the women are not asuras al baleim, kan bekarkom shel osa malchus, kan bekarko shel malchus acheres. Now, Karkum, we said, was the capturing army. And there's a certain, let's say the Soviets are surrounding the city. And now the commander-in-chief of the army comes and says, let's capture the city and we'll annex it to the Malchus, such that from now on, all of the, Toshavim, all of those who live in the city, all the local, the citizens, what do you call them? Residents. All the local residents will now pay taxes to that country because they've now taken over that city. At this point, they're very happy if the Bnei Ha'ir, those who are residents of the city, have financial wherewithal to pay the taxes. So in such a case, which is called a karkum shalosa malchus, they watched and protect and warn their chayalim not to have be'ilo with the members, the women in the city. And therefore they're mutara. So this is the first time that we see that even in a case of a karkum, and there's an entire battalion of soldiers, of non-Jewish soldiers that have surrounded the city and it's under siege, nevertheless, we're not choshesh that they were boel, And that's because it's karkum shel osa malchus, that now they're annexing that city. But Khan, our mission that says that all the women in the city are asuras l'baleim, that's a karkum shel malchus acheres. They don't have any, aspirations to annex the city. This city is nowhere near their malchus on the other side of the world. And therefore, they're not going to have any compassion on the members of the city, neither with regard to Mammon, and certainly not with regard to livolis nechaseyim. So the Gemara objects. Are you telling me that if it's the battalion of that local government, Alosa Malchus Nami, the Gemara says we should even be afraid of Be'ilah from the Kovshim, even though it's that same Malchus which they intend to annex the city. It's impossible to assume that since the government supervises their chayalim to make sure that they don't rape the women in the city, it's impossible that one chayal would somehow, Arik actually in modern English is called AWOL. Do you remember that phrase? He would AWOL and go into the city, sort of leave his battalion behind in order to grab one of the women and rape her. And since we don't know which woman was raped, and yet we assume that someone was raped, we have to create an Isser on all the women in the city. And that has to do with Kol Kavua Kemechtal Mechzedom. So therefore, the Gemara objects. How can you tell me that if it's karkum chalotza malchus, then the women are mutaris l'baleim? You're assuming that what? Not one single chayal got away, snuck into the city and raped the woman. Om Rabbi Yehuda Mishmuel kishim mishamros roa zuesu. Mishmoros roa zuesu. So Rabbi Yehuda, in the name of Shmuel, is protecting Chizkiah, and he's saying that in this case, there was an outpost on top, on a hilltop, and the king of that country made sure that they would be meticulously supervised. And Roos Zo et Zo. Now, I'm not sure if Zo is referring to the various mishmaros or to the various chayalim. I suspect that since it says Roos in Lashon Nekeva, it's going back to the mishmaros. So the mishmaros, I guess the different battalions, they see each other from one post to the other. And they're very careful to make sure that no one runs out there and does what he wants to do. So the Gemara asks, Efsha Delo Nema Purta. Maybe the Shomrim will fall asleep at some point in the middle of the night. And if we're choshesh for that, then maybe we should be choshesh that, they didn't catch this one guy amongst their chayalim who ran into the city and married and raped one of the women. Rabbi Levi, Kigon de Mahada Lola Masa Shushilta. The kalba ugvaza, the avza. This is like what we call today an electrified barbed wire fence kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I can't translate each one of these words. There's a lot of heavy Aramaic here, but shushilta are like a chain.
Right.
And kalbu gvaza are apparently some sort of sticks. So they put a chain of sticks. I assume it means it was going around the city. And avaz I thought was ducks, but that doesn't make any sense. Do you have any English translation for this?
Yeah, I think they say that the ducks warned the guards
Oh, I see. The
of their
ducks were
enclosure.
sort of like guard dogs.
Yeah.
In any event, they had this non-stop chain of a certain kind of metal substance that if anyone would shake that metal because he was trying to sneak out,
Right.
then the dogs and the ducks would hear about it. They would start yelling and screaming. Anyway, the bottom line is that we're not even afraid that one chayal was able to break through. Rabbi Abba bar Zavda, pligi ba Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya v'Rabbana. Chad Omar, according to one opinion, kan v'karkum shalosam malchus v'kan v'karkum shal malchus acheres. V'lo kashale v'lo midi. Now, it's the question that we saw above didn't even bother them at all. Why aren't we choshesh that one of them, ran out of the city and had a bila, even though it was a karkum shalosam malchus and they were breaking, they were AWOLing, they were breaking the rules because they did such a great job of supervision that they guaranteed that none of their chayalim would go into the city and rape the women. But Chad Omar, according to another opinion, either it's Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya or the Rabbanan, Kashalei Kol Hani. Now, why shouldn't we be choshesh that maybe someone broke through the supervision? Umeshani, and they answered that they had such a perfectly good security system. Could go into Mahadile Lamosa Shushalita, Vekalba, Vigvaza, Vyabs. So they had Shomrim all around the city. That's what the king demanded. And they had this uninterrupted chain of metal so they could hear the call if somebody would try to sneak out. And they had the dogs and the ducks that would scream out and so forth and so on. Omar of Idi bar Ovin, Omar of Yitzchak bar Shayan, when it says in our Mishnah that if the Goyim surrounded the city with a siege, then all the women inside are asuros. That's only if there's no place to hide in the city. Im yesham achboa achas, if there's a place where they can hide, like they used to dig subterranean ditches, caves, that they would hide in the caves. And the Kovshim, those conquerors, would not be able to find them. Is then matzeles ala konos kula. That would protect the legal status of the konos, those who are married to kohanim, from tuma. Boy, Rab Yirmiyah, eino machzekes ala achas mahu. What happens if you have a small cave where one woman alone could hide in the cave and protect herself? Mi amrina kol chada v'chada hainu ha. Can we point to each one woman who's married to a Kohen and say she's the one who hid in the Dilbala Amrina? We're not going to say on each one of them that this is the one that was able to successfully save herself by hiding in that standing room for one person only cave. So this was the suffix of Rabbi Yirmiyah. I'm just wondering if the Gemara is going to end up with Teku. Usually when you have Boy Rabbi Yirmiyah, it ends in Teku. But the Gemara doesn't even understand the suffix of Rabbi Yirmiyah. Maishna Shnei Shvilin. Right? Why should this be different than the case of Shnei Shvilin? Right? You have two pathways. One of them has a kever in it, and it's across the entire shvil. And a person went to the shvil If it's the one that has the kever, it's certainly he was mahil al kever and he's tame. But the other shvil is tar; it has no burial. V'holach bi'echad min. And a person who's tar went down one of these shvilim. The asa taros, he was osik the taros. And now we have a suffix where the taros became contracted tumah from him. And afterwards, his friend went down the other shvil, the asa taros. And Rabbi Yehuda Omer nishal zebefnei zev zebefnei atzmo is taros. If each one comes to ask the shaila alone, then we can paskin for him that the taros that he was dealing with are tahoros, because suffix tumachus rabim is tar. And this, despite the fact that logically it's impossible that both these people are tar, because one of them definitely went down the shvil where there's a kever. Nevertheless, we're going to deal with every person separately and paskin based on that person's status. However, shneim kiachas, if the two people who went down the two fields came together in front of the rabbi and they were asking about their status, is tmeos. It's impossible that both are tahorim, and since in one orah he's pasking for both of them because they both came simultaneously to ask the question, then he's involved in an impossible self-contradiction. Is Rabbi Yossi Omer ben kachu ben kach tmeim. Even if they came one after the other, it's impossible that both are tahorim. There's a chasha to that very orah, and they both have to be tmeim. Yomer Rava v'tem Rabbi Yochanan. If they both came together simultaneously, we have to be matami both of them. But if they came one after the other, tahorim. And there's no machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi. So where is the machlokas? So nechleku, the battleground here between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi, he comes to ask about his own status and that of his friend. Mar, according to Rabbi Yossi, midamile libavasachas. It's as if, because the psak is going to be for both him and the one he's asking about, the other guy. So therefore, it's like vasachas, and they have to assume that both of them are tmeim. Umar Savar, Umar, meaning Rabbi Yehuda's Medami Leila Bazecher, he compares it to a case where they came one after the other, and for each one separately, we could say tar, even though there's a contradiction in the two oros. So I guess he's saying that even though he's asking about his friend, there'll be a separate horah for his friend. Each gavra gets his own horah, and that's called bazecher zeh. He's really, in effect, asking for himself and not for his friend. Is harehu tar. If it's bazecher zeh, he's tar. Uki gavra v'cheskas tara. So we see that Rabbi Yossi holds, and Allah is like Rabbi Yossi, that if he comes to ask for himself and his friend, it's as if they both came to ask simultaneously, and they're both tmeim. V'hachanami, and here too, in the case where one woman hid herself in the cave of the Shari lo Lakulu, kibas achas dami. Gemara is asking if we're going to be mitayar all of them, because on each one we have a suffix, maybe they were able to protect themselves and hide themselves. So therefore they're all tahoros. What's going on over here? That can't be reconciled with Rabbi Yossi, and we pass like Rabbi Yossi, because that's kibas achas dami. It's as if all the karnos in the city came to ask the question simultaneously. So why does Rabbi Yirmiyah vacillate on this point? That maybe we could be mitayar every single woman individually, and say that she went into that machbo, into that hiding place, when logically it's impossible to say that Kulan Torahs, because we know that at least one of them, if not many of them, were Tmeos. And the Gemara rejects the analogy, Hachi Hashta. We're not going to compare the case of Shvuya to the case of Shnei Shvilin. Why? Hasam, in the case of Shnei Shvilin, Bivadai Ika Tuma. We know that there's Tuma in one of the Shvilin. So you cannot be Matar both of them simultaneously because each one went on a different Shvil. And one of them is for sure Vadai Tamet. But Hacha, Mi Yemer de Mi Tamet. Right? The holy Shvuya is only Nisa Safek. We don't know for a fact that he raped her. The Chacham would machmir to create an Isa Misafek. But if there's room to be mistapek, that maybe each one of them might have been that one who went into the machmo and saved herself. Now we could be matir based on that, even though in this tshuva, in this ruling, we know that we by being matir, all the women of Karnos in the city, one of them is definitely Tameh. And that's because the entire enterprise of Shvuya is based on Safek. Don't compare that to the case of Shnei Shvilin, where we know that one of them certainly contracted Tumah. And now we're up to Boy Rav Ashi. On the bottom of Daf of Zayin Amud Aleph. Okay, then we'll stop here. Thank you so much.
Okay, shkoyach. Yeah,
have a great week.
No problem. Yeah, you too.
And don't have any nightmares here, though. There's plenty of room to have nightmares.